Mei Li, the maid, opened the curtains on the windows and sunlight came into the room. The baby who was lying in her crib didn't understand why it was so bright, and maybe they forgot to turn off the lights again last night. She decided to rub her eyes, and as soon as her skin felt the touch, she didn't understand why her hands were so small. She opened her eyes and couldn't believe it was her hands while making incomprehensible sounds instead of words. May reported that Her Majesty was awake. The little girl couldn't understand what was going on. Who was Her Majesty? After a while, men gathered around her. So many people came. They looked at her like they were in a zoo. That's how the little girl felt. She learned something from what they said. The men continued to talk heatedly. This was the state of Yi Dai No, and it was about to come to an end. The gods couldn't just watch the collapse of this empire and allowed the empress to give birth to a child, and the oracle informed everyone that this child was born to save and lead the empire. That's right, and this child is just her, the soul of a miserable 16-year-old high school student and the body of a 1-year-old child. Her original name is Gu Yun Yun, and now her name is Iris. The maid Mei Li held the Queen of State Yi Tae No Iris, who was 1-year-old, in her arms. Mei Li greeted His Majesty the Prince Regent. The prince asked why she was still alive. It is not without reason that this child was chosen by the god. The knights behind her trembled with fear. They thought there was no hope for her, but in the end Her Majesty had dealt with this deadly poison. Iris thought this Prince Regent was handsome but too crazy. The prince informed the maid that since she was awake, she should bring her to him for instruction in affairs of state. May replied that Her Highness, though recovered from the poison, was still quite weak. The little girl couldn't believe that she was only a year old, and she should already be learning how to conduct state affairs. Only now the little girl decided to remember the maid's words that someone wanted to kill her. The Prince Regent added that a child chosen by God could not be weak. May obediently agreed, but the little girl didn't like it. After a while, they were already sitting in his office. Iris couldn't believe that he had said that she would learn how to conduct public affairs, and that they had actually come to see him. But if she had to be reborn to face a pile of official documents and a bunch of contract killings, she'd better get somewhere else. Gotta be queen, save the empire and all that. Isn't that a bit much for a 1-year-old? Besides, what luxury. It doesn't look like this state is going to end anytime soon. Suddenly, the office doors opened abruptly and his subordinates rushed in. The first one reported that it had been raining for months in the south, so there was heavy flooding. The second reported that in the central part of the country there had not been a drop of rain for many months, so there was a drought. The third explained that in the vicinity of the capital are hiding robbers. There are already many victims. And lastly, they said that in the eastern part of the city, locusts had attacked several districts this year, so they might not be able to harvest a grain of rice. The little girl didn't understand why so many things were happening at once. Was this empire really so miserable? The Prince Regent turned to Yu Li and asked about what the ministers had said about coming to the palace to discuss the whole situation, to which Yu Li replied that most of them were already waiting for him in the cabinet. But Minister Kai Xia was sick, and Minister Kei Li Iman said that his mom was seriously ill and couldn't get out, and Minister Ma Bofei said that there was something wrong with his legs. The little girl wanted to say that they were lying, but only succeeded in saying the word Tamdabi. These ministers are too frivolous to think of excuses properly, so it's no wonder this empire is going to collapse. The prince saw the little girl's reaction and thought that she really understood. The little girl immediately grabbed the bottle and continued drinking. She thought it was bad because he was too surprised. He was looking at her like that. What worried her was that there was no way the prince could have guessed that she had an adult soul. The Prince Regent turned to Yu Li and ordered them to arm themselves and bring those who did not come, informing them that the child of the god had lost his temper over this, and if they did not come, it would be considered that they were opposing the laws of the god. The prince approached Iris. He looked at her for a bit and then informed her that she was ugly, and not like his ugly sister. His Majesty didn't even hide his disgust. He asked Mei Li to carry the little girl to her room to rest, for it was getting late. As soon as the maid put the baby girl in the crib, she immediately began to resent him. The nasty kid called him ugly. The maid asked His Majesty not to be angry, for the Empress was very beautiful, and when she grew up, she would become like her too. May took the handkerchief from the little girl and gave her a pacifier. Iris accepted it with great pleasure and thought that her maid knew how to flatter. But just as she thought about what would happen when she grew up, she noticed the figure of a very different maid and May's body lying on the floor. Iris didn't realize who it was in front of her and what had happened to her maid. That girl took out a bottle with some kind of poison and said that she was unlucky to be born in this royal family. The little girl asked to be saved because she realized that the girl was the sender and wanted to do it again. She ordered her to drink the contents quickly, for if she didn't drink it, another person would come later and kill her anyway. Iris begged for faster, someone to save her. Kate appeared and instantly removed the threat. Kate apologized for being a little late. The little girl was just thrilled with this girl, but she felt like she was fainting. At the minister's meeting, Yu Li came running in and informed His Majesty that something terrible had happened. An assassination attempt had been made on Her Majesty. As soon as the ministers heard the news, they didn't understand how Her Majesty had been completely assassinated again if she had just regained consciousness. They wondered if there was really some secret villain out there. This is the 5th time this has happened. The Prince Regent asked what's up with Her Majesty. Yu Li said that since the poisoner was discovered in time, she was killed on the spot, and Her Majesty only fainted from shock. The prince announced that the meeting was over for the time being. He decided to still go and check some small things. As he walked down the corridor, Yu Li asked if it was too dangerous to remove the guards from Her Majesty's quarters on purpose, as she might get hurt again. The prince asked him to calm down, as he had sent Kate to guard Her Majesty. His Majesty asked if they had managed to capture the poison killer this time, to which the aide replied no. It seems that this traitor is hiding very well. Someone asked Iris to wake up. The little girl didn't realize who was calling her. The little girl woke up and wondered where it was she was. Iris saw the girl who was calling her. It was the goddess of wisdom. She explained that she had called her to her on purpose. Iris couldn't believe that the gods really existed, since the goddess of wisdom was in front of her. Something very bright began to shine, causing Iris's eyes to squint. In an instant, the goddess of wisdom was sitting on a bench with flowers all around her. The goddess of wisdom informed her that according to the agreement, she would be given a god's blessing. Iris didn't understand what agreement and blessing she was talking about. The goddess blesses her in the name of the wise god Mo-Ya and wishes for her to become the most talented queen in the history of the Yidai No state. The little girl felt her whole body become so light. The initiation ceremony was over. The goddess said that it was time for the little girl to go back. She hoped that she could become a worthy queen as her grandfather wanted. Iris asked her to wait. She hugged the goddess. She didn't understand what was wrong. The little girl kept thinking that she could only become a talented queen when she grew up. But for now, she could be killed at any moment. Iris asked for help from her sister goddess to save her. This was the first time the goddess of wisdom had met someone who dared to capriciously sit in the arms of a goddess. At the mercy of her grandfather, the goddess would grant her one more thing, after which they would be considered even. It was a pendant that grants her self-preservation and untouchability, its spirit smile. Waking up in her crib, Iris wondered what this marvelous gift was. Mei Li noticed that the baby girl was awake and alerted Kate to it. The maid gently embraced Her Majesty and reported that Prince Ya No had recently visited them to check on her condition. This unexpected act of compassion on the prince's part amazed her, for she had not expected him to have such human qualities. At this time, Kate was busily tossing the bottle from hand to hand. Iris, disturbed by the way Mei Li was expressing her thoughts, thought about her gift of self-preservation and inviolability received from the goddess. This gift reminded her of her uniqueness and made her feel more confident in this world. Inspired by her new confidence, Iris decided to apply her enchanting, love-filled eyes to Kate. She believed it could help in softening things up and building trust between them. Kate, noticing Iris's gaze, headed toward her to approach her and perhaps discuss some matters, but suddenly let the bottle slip out of her hands, which did not escape May's attentive gaze. Kate met the little girl with a serious look and reminded her of the consequences if there was another misunderstanding with the milk bottle, warning her that it would have unpleasant consequences for Her Majesty. Despite the warning, Iris was still hungry, and she wanted to eat despite her clumsy actions. Shortly after that moment, Iris sat down on the floor with a book, flipping through the pages thoughtfully. This was something incredible to her, for she never thought she would ever be able to encounter a goddess, and that fact made her marvel at the world around her. The thought of protecting the gods gave Iris confidence and freedom of choice. As she continued to study the book, she noticed something important that made her think and caught her attention: a murderous poison. She had discovered it by accident. The little girl had heard Mei Li chatting with the others and saying that she had been poisoned with just this stuff. It said that black magic was used to prepare it. Iris was wondering what black magic was, but suddenly, a figure behind her appeared. It was Yano, quietly approaching the little girl. He took the book away and addressed the maids about the contents, wondering if she was able to read. Iris felt shocked at Yano's sudden appearance, wondering how he could have passed unnoticed, and what could have escaped her notice. With a pleading tone in her voice, the little girl sought to touch the book in an attempt to prove her literacy, but her words seemed like an incoherent set of sounds devoid of clear meaning. Prince Yano, watching Iris's awkward attempt to express her thoughts, reflected on the possibility that she seemed to be able to perceive human speech despite her young age and inexperience. Suddenly, Yu Li burst into their room. He turned to His Majesty and reported that there was an advancement on the traitor's case. The prince looked towards Iris, who was also interested to know something. Yano informed him that they needed to go out to talk. He decided it was best that way, so she knew nothing about it. The little girl decisively grabbed the prince's finger and expressed her desire to hear what they were talking about, showing her interest. This emotional moment evoked deep compassion from Yu Li, who sensed how much the little girl actually wanted to be included in what was happening. The prince, seeing that the little girl needed help, picked Iris up off the ground and handed her over to Mei Li's caring hands to take over her care. On his way to the door, the Prince Regent asked if the one who had given the information was sure it was correct. In response, the one confirmed his certainty, adding that the religious community of black magic that was supposed to have disappeared had re-emerged, which could be a danger. I but turned my gaze to the little girl, contemplating the need to make some changes to my plans for her, realizing that the situation required adjustments. Mei Li was persistently trying to wake up Her Majesty, reminding her that it was already time to start studying the rules for adjusting official documents, emphasizing the urgency of the matter. Iris, feeling exhausted, dreamed of just going to bed, not wanting to think about any other business or duties, favoring peace and rest. Upon opening the door, the maid found Mr. Yu Li in front of her, and, a little embarrassed, asked about the reason for his visit, showing interest and curiosity about his appearance. Yu Li explained that His Majesty Ya No had issued an order to ensure Her Majesty's safety, and so she should stay in her room and not leave it unnecessarily. Iris was suddenly awakened by such unexpected news. Her fuzzy thoughts scattered, and she felt like she was thrust into a situation she had no idea about at all. Kate reassured the little girl, assuring her that she cared for her and would be there to help with the situation, urging her not to worry. Mei Li, expressing her concern, asked if they were going to lock Her Majesty in a room, emphasizing the need for clarification. Iris, for her part, could not determine if this was the true nature of Yano. Kate supplemented the advice by informing her that Her Majesty should drink a glass of milk to regain her strength, emphasizing the importance of caring for the baby girl's health and well-being. Suddenly, the oil bottle falls to the floor and its contents spill out, creating chaos in the room, which displeases the baby girl. Determined and persistent, the little girl is determined that she will not allow the Prince Regent to carry out his plans and is ready to fight for her beliefs. Kate, trying to handle the situation, takes responsibility for cleaning up the spill, but suddenly the door of the room swings open, disrupting her attempts to restore order. Baby, expecting house arrest, finds herself unexpectedly drawn into new events that open her eyes to reality. So many people burst into the room that Baby feels excitement and anxiety, not knowing what they are going to do or how it will affect her future. The man solemnly announced that their calling was to ensure that the little girl would prepare for the royal trial for the next 4 years at the behest of Yano's Majesty. He emphasized that they had a responsibility to ensure the success of her education and training. Clarifying the details, Mei Li inquired if the little girl was pertinent to her studies, given her young age, which was barely a year old. This allowed her to assess whether the training would be tailored to the little girl's age and ability. Addressing the little girl, the man introduced himself as Simon, responsible for her training in witchcraft, demonstrating his role in shaping her magical skills and knowledge. This emphasized the importance of an in-depth understanding of magic in order to successfully pass the test. Sai La was introduced as responsible for her royal etiquette lessons, emphasizing the importance of building the little girl's skills and knowledge of court customs and rules of conduct, which will be an important aspect of her preparation for the royal test. Bo Day was put in charge of lessons on royal publicity, which entailed teaching the babe aspects of public relations and media interaction in her future role. Various instructors were put in charge of different aspects of her training, including financial skills, world law, and a host of other areas, each contributing to her knowledge and skills. She had already heard of the royal test, having studied it in a special book. This exam was considered the most prestigious and highest in the state, and candidates who passed it could obtain official positions at the appropriate level, making it a true test for ambitious residents. Yu Li, who was always by Yano's side, was a recognized writing master in the state, and his talent was celebrated from childhood, calling him a prodigy. Even he, despite his ability, passed the royal test only at the second attempt when he was 17 years old. Now he makes a demand that she, even as a mere 5-year-old girl, must pass this exam despite the fact that this genius could not pass it the first time. The idea of her facing such a test at such a young age made her feel incredibly pressured and stressed. This test was much more than just an exam and seemed impossible for such a young girl. After arriving, they were shown a schedule that was made by Majesty Yano himself, specifically for Her Majesty's needs, presenting a plan of lessons and classes for each day. The schedule began with morning lessons on royal publicity, handling of finances, world law, and lessons on royal etiquette to prepare Her Majesty for various aspects of government and social activities. In the afternoon, lessons in ancient language, witchcraft, and in the evening, classes in writing and Virgil's theory of physical properties were expected, which caused bewilderment and shock to May and Iris, who had not expected such an intense and varied curriculum. In a situation where the schedule seemed overly overwhelming for the little girl, she turned to her little sister, the goddess of wisdom, for help, asking for salvation and direction in this challenge awaiting her in the learning process. They had books brought to their room that Her Majesty would need for the next day. If possible, Iris could preview them. Then they would finish early. The little girl didn't understand but whether she was human at all or not. Is it right and effective enough to teach a 1-year-old child in this way? The teacher sternly reminded the little girl of the importance of writing down and memorizing all the information presented in class, warning her that if she did not, she would be denied milk. In the royal etiquette class, Sai La emphasized that ladies trained in good manners should refrain from talking at the table during meals, emphasizing the importance of adhering to the rules of decorum. On the other hand, Simon, during a lesson on witchcraft, argued that the sensory perception of magic can deepen in the presence of physical pain, so he advised the little girl to close her eyes to better feel its power and energy. The little girl listening to him couldn't understand how closing her eyes would help her feel the magic better, and wondered if he was trying to lead her to something that might harm her. Then Kate rang the bell, announcing the end of the lesson, which meant that class time was over and the students were free to leave. Simon only exhaled and added that carelessness would only slow Iris down. She definitely needed to double her strength. He felt that even if one spent a lifetime to train, this child wouldn't be able to meet the requirements. Now he had to be tougher. Following Simon's words that doubling strength required a certain approach, the little girl felt a sudden shock and bewilderment. Simon turned abruptly and left the room, leaving the little girl alone inside the magic circle, which was still unbroken, making her feel trapped and defenseless. In desperation, the little girl turned to her teacher, begging him not to leave, as she felt unsafe without his presence and support. After receiving a promise from Kate that she would catch up with Simon, the little girl calmed down a bit, hoping that she would soon be back to safety and able to leave this magic circle. At that moment, Iris felt her breath catch, as if an invisible force was squeezing her chest, preventing her from taking a full breath. Shimmering chains suddenly appeared in front of her eyes, confusing her thoughts and making her feel at a loss, unable to understand how she was in this situation or where these unexpected shackles had come from. May, noticing the appearance of the chains, decided to react instantly, rushing to Her Majesty with a desire to help her free herself from this sudden captivity, and despite her fright, she was eager to find a way to free the little girl from the chains. Even the maid, who was facing such a situation for the first time, tried to help by grabbing the chain and attempting to free her young mistress. Her efforts were in vain, however, and the force holding the little girl captive threw her back, preventing her from even coming close to solving the problem. As the chains grew tighter and tighter, and the little girl felt her strength slowly draining away, she pleaded for help, hoping that someone would hear her cry and come to her aid at this difficult moment. Suddenly, abruptly, Simon, whom Kate had tied up and kicked with her foot, fell into the room. She orders him to loosen the magic circle, to which Simon replied that the history of magic says that fear of death is the most effective way to activate hidden magical abilities. If Her Majesty can activate those hidden magical abilities, then she herself will be able to destroy the circle. Kate abruptly grabbed the one by the collar and added that His Majesty Yano ordered to make sure that no one dares to harm Her Majesty, and then asked about him seeking his death, or what. May turned to Her Majesty. As Simon scrutinized what was happening, he wondered if it was possible that she was focusing all her powers to interrupt the magic circle that surrounded them. The tension in the room peaked as the chains instantly broke and a sudden light filled the space, illuminating everything around them and causing everyone present to hold their breath at the unexpected display of magic. Feeling on the verge of frustration and surprise, Simon tried to realize that breaking a magic circle required forces beyond the capabilities of even two adult mages. The question of what it actually was remained a mystery to him, raising even more questions. When the little girl cautiously opened her eyes, she was about to encounter something unusual and incomprehensible, and her mind was trying to make sense of what had happened and what the true meaning of this unusual event was. She gingerly touched something that resembled a mirror, and instantly the thought arose that it could be her heart, symbolizing her inner self and true feelings. Suddenly, she felt her body begin to be pulled into an unknown abyss, as if an invisible force was beckoning her into the depths of unexplored secrets and mysteries. As if torn from reality, she found herself lying in a deserted field, surrounded by the emptiness and darkness of night. The strange place she found herself in had stripped her of her footing and left her alone with her thoughts and sensations. Her pendant, which she assumed to be her heart, began to glow with a bright light, and wings appeared behind her back, shimmering in the darkness and illuminating her surroundings. Iris didn't realize if it was all thanks to her. The goddess of the white day appeared, appearing with a message that by purifying her heart, the heroine would gain unlimited possibilities, which should be used to defeat the dark forces and save her state. As quickly as she appeared, the goddess disappeared, leaving only a momentary impression of her presence. This mysterious disappearance left behind a mystery shrouding her appearance and disappearance. Iris felt inwardly that the voice of the goddess was familiar to her. As May began to call for Her Majesty, Iris, coming back to reality, slowly became aware of her surroundings. Doubts crept into her thoughts, and she wondered if it was possible that it was all just a dream. Maid May asked Kate to get the doctor quickly, Simon didn't realize that this was the power of a divine child. It was simply unbelievable to him. May turned to Her Majesty and asked if something was hurting her. The baby replied that she was not in any pain, but suddenly she began to bleed and collapsed. In the evening, the doctor said that they had been looking for a long time, but they had not found the cause of fever and bloody vomiting in the baby. Maybe it is related to magic, so they should let the priest come and have him examine her, but in the meantime, Her Majesty should rest. The little girl was cold and felt like her strength was continuously running out, but she finally had time to rest for a while. May informed her that Her Majesty should calm down and rest, and lessons would have to wait. She extinguished the candles and left the room. Iris vomited blood for the first time. As soon as she remembered that, she immediately shook, or maybe it was because she had forcibly broken Teacher Simon's magic circle. Cal had come to her room and informed her that there was nothing special about this divine child, and everyone hoped to entrust her with the administration of the state. Better to destroy it themselves beforehand. The boy despised her. Iris didn't realize who it was in general that he had so unceremoniously entered the girl's room, and even his mouth was so poisonous, even poisonous tree frogs bowed. Cal kept going on and on about how he'd seen all sorts of trash in his life, but he'd never met anyone like her before. Soul broken, body frail, but still working hard for unfulfilled goals, so pathetic and like a bedbug. The little girl couldn't believe what he called her. She gathered all her strength and stood up. How dare he even say that about her? He didn't even dare enter through the main entrance, the stinking rat. With anger pulsing inside, Iris glared at the boy, willing him to say his name before she dealt him a fatal blow, tearing him apart. In response to her threats, the boy only laughed and defiantly asked if she intended to kill him. Contemptuously, he mocked her shortcomings, declaring that she was not even able to control her own magical abilities, and that her only value lay in spending her life being nothing more than a beautiful but soulless doll. Iris, frenzied with anger and insults, resolutely resorted to her magic, intending to finally destroy him and prove her power. Suddenly she felt a sharp pain in her heart and fell backwards onto the soft bed, losing her strength. This signaled to Cal that her soul was shattered. Her magical powers were running out, and now it was time to take her heart. However, looking closely, he noticed that a crack had appeared on the girl's heart. The sudden change in the Queen's condition was unexpected to everyone. The room became quiet, and an aura of tension could be felt everywhere. The strange occurrence of a crack in the girl's heart caused bewilderment and anxiety among those present. The Queen's condition became critical, and every second became worth its weight in gold. Everyone around was waiting for the development of events with tension, realizing that even the smallest details could be decisive for her future fate. He didn't think. Then the pure heart had already merged with her body. If she died, then her heart would be broken as well. Besides, the magic of heart selection is very complicated. If he took it away so rashly, then any disturbance from other people might harm him. It seems like he should wait until she's a little older and come up with another, more foolproof plan. A voice could be heard outside the window looking for Mr. Cal. The maid kept talking about what she should do. If she lost the high priest's apprentice, she would most likely just die. Cal carefully used his healing magic on the little girl, explaining that it would keep her alive until he could complete his mission and extract her heart. This act demonstrated his compassion and determination to help her survive. Upon awakening, the little girl appealed to Cal not to leave, as she had yet to kill him. To this, Cal replied to her, reassuring her that there was no need to worry, as they would surely meet again. The creep approached the situation with ease, expressing his confidence that sooner or later the babe would still find him. In the morning, May said that it was definitely God's will, for Her Majesty's illness, contrary to all expectations, had passed. Yesterday it seemed as if she was in a dream, and when she woke up it was as if nothing had happened. Even though there had been a lot of traumatic things that day, she had been able to practice magic and other things after that day, and it had ended with a little test. Simon looked at it all and reported that it was pretty good. Iris sat down to do some writing. May reported that it was getting late and she should get some rest. The little girl kept thinking about how she was almost done and couldn't rest yet. The teachers were testing, and all in one voice said not bad. Time passed and the royal test was getting closer and closer. In history, truth is born. History is signs from the past, a warning for the present, and a lesson for future generations. This means that history requires responsibility. There are certain compulsions, but they are very easily resolvable obligations. Bo Dai reported that Her Majesty's results are getting better and better. She is the most gifted eunuch he has ever trained. Sila added that she has never seen that a young child can study finance so closely. Her Majesty is incredible. Simon added that Her Majesty is extremely intelligent. She is only 5 years old and she is at the level of a 10-year-old child. But the royal test is not so easy. Participants 30, 40 years old can't always pass it. His Majesty Yano's order is still in effect. If Her Majesty doesn't pass the test, they will all die. Bo Te explained that after all, Her Majesty is just a child and this test is too difficult for her. They all agreed to this and stood frowning. The little girl expressed her fears, warning that if they complained and chastised their fate a lot, it might scare away their luck and negatively affect their results. Bo Te turned to Her Majesty to reassure her, explaining that her current accomplishments were already very impressive, and no one doubted her abilities. He urged her not to doubt herself and her abilities. Suddenly, Mei Li entered the room and reminded her that rest time had come to an end, and it was time for her to rest. This reminder of time emphasized the importance of planning and time management to accomplish tasks effectively. The little girl obediently moved toward the door, ready to rest, but before she left, she turned around and added that the royal test was coming up soon, and she was sure she could handle it. Bo Te replied that they have faith in her, for now, all they have to do is believe in Her Majesty. Test day. May opened the curtains and informed Her Majesty that it was time for her to get up since it was morning. The little girl, rubbing her eyes, only replied that she understood. There are somehow very few people this year. The man replied that he didn't understand anything about the current situation. The Celtic Empire has invaded their borders for the 3rd time. They want to take them over. Who would want to become an official of this unfortunate state now? In the south, the floods are happening again and again. Over 100,000 people have died this year. The men kept talking about the fact that this year the Queen herself is taking the test. The man asked if he even believed that a 5-year-old child could pass the test. He does not believe in this child, but others do. The 7-year-old son of the Prime Minister is also taking the test. Oz, 7-year-old examiner, the gentleman bowed. Suddenly, Oz heard footsteps approaching and realized that examiner Andre, barely 8 years old, had arrived. This unexpected turn made him turn around towards the boy. Andre explained that his father, a senior general, had insisted that he take part in the test, which caused some surprise among those present. The announcement caused quite a shock to everyone present, who couldn't believe that the general's son had decided to join in as well. The next one was announced. It was examinee Iris Yi Dai No, 5 years old, which left the guys even more shocked. The little girl with Latte showed up to join them. When the little girl and Latte entered the hall, she noticed 2 small children who were also there. This made her wonder, had they come to participate in the test, or did they have other purposes? The hall where the examiners were being observed was filled with tension and anticipation. Teachers, examiners, and other important people were concentrating on the test. On the crystal screen, Yano saw something amazing and intriguedly moved closer to examine it more closely. The picture in front of him was of particular interest to him. The Prince Regent turned to the others and suddenly noted that the children of 2 influential officials were also present at the test. For the teachers, this day was a test during which they pondered their fate and the possibility of staying alive. The Prime Minister, speaking to the general's son, asked him to keep an eye on his son during the battle for fear that he might get ahead. The Prime Minister asked the general's son to watch his son during the battle, fearing that he might get ahead of him, which could undermine the Queen's authority in front of the people. The general, in response to the Prime Minister, only chuckled and remarked that the Prime Minister's son might have gained more experience while fencing. The priest, turning to Cal, asked if he would like to take part in the test with Her Majesty, to which Cal replied that his level did not yet allow him to participate in this test. To which the priest only informed that with his level of magic, he could be the teacher for this entire crowd. Cal only grinned, remaining unfazed. The Prime Minister, thinking back on the rumors and stories he had heard from spies and witnesses, recalled how mysterious the circumstances surrounding this child's arrival in the city had been. Snowfall, rolling thunder, and hints of celestial intervention added to the mystery of its origin. Recalling the talk that Yano had personally met this child, the Prime Minister couldn't help but notice the unusual nature of the encounter. Although the details remained behind the scenes, but the very fact of communication between the head of state and an unknown baby led to speculation about his importance and role in the future. Maybe he is the dark horse of Prince Yano. It had been a long time since they had seen the little one. The majestic hall was filled with anticipation, an atmosphere of tension tightly enveloping those present. The little girl, standing at her seat, felt the gazes of the others piercing her back, not realizing what had caused such attention and tension. Suddenly, the great examiner approached them, whose appearance and commanding presence immediately caught everyone's attention. He announced that the history and literature exam would begin, making everyone gathered focus on the upcoming test. Rising towards the heavens, the starlight of past eras brightly illuminated the cultural and historical heritage of mankind. This light of the past concealed the meaning and significance of every event and historical figure who had given the world something unique and valuable. Iris had heard much about the royal test, considered the most prestigious examination on the entire continent, and now that she was on the spot, she was convinced of its greatness and importance herself. The examiner magically handed out the assignments to everyone and explained that each test was divided into 4 parts, so they should answer thoughtfully and time was limited. The little girl confidently took up the pen. She is not afraid. These questions are nothing to her. But in the end, at 4 years old, she learned everything and reached the level of Yuli when he took the test, or the level of a normal 30-year-old person. But now Yano is constantly pushing her. She hasn't realized his motives yet, and isn't so naive to openly show all her abilities. The little girl has decided that she needs to get the bare minimum. 60 out of 60, no points lost. History of magic. The continent of Moya is 3,000 years old. The gods sent a divine fruit to the continent that gave mankind divine powers. Brief history of Moya. There was war on the continent for hundreds and thousands of years. But then there were 3 wise men who founded an empire and maintained peace for a long time. The rules of magic. All the forces of things are unchanging. Faith in all things is eternal. The karma of all generations is unified, and the rules are above all. The harmony of all things lies in balance and orderliness, and Iris has consistently placed all values in their proper places, as they should be. Mutual transfer of rights is what is called a contract between people. Oz looked at the little girl and noted that she was so relaxed. He wondered if it was true and she was God's child like everyone else was saying. Her father told him to trash her, but he doesn't even know if he can. The observation room. Baudet sat there with a sour face, which Yano noticed. The Prince Regent asked the teacher about what happened, and he didn't believe in Her Majesty's abilities. Baudet apologized and said that Her Majesty would not be participating in the fencing test this time, and then asked if it would have any effect on her overall score or not. Just then, the teacher remembered that Her Majesty was still too young, and His Majesty Yano didn't require her to take the swordsmanship test. The Prince Regent suggested that the little girl close the gap in fencing with other subjects, which elicited a disapproving look from Baudet, who quickly intervened, pointing out the unfairness of such an approach, for it automatically meant that she would start with a 60-point gap from the rest of the class, making her practically unfit to take the test. Moreover, he observed that Yano himself had not informed them of such a strategy in advance, which made those present even more displeased, for such changes should have been announced in advance. The Prince Regent, slightly wary, interrupted Boti's objections, saying that how did he know that the little girl would not be able to pass the exam? He clarified that it was enough for her to get the maximum score on the magic test to make up for the lost points and overtake the others. The Prince Regent then turned to Teacher Simon to clarify whether he agreed with this approach and really believed that the little girl had a good chance of passing the test despite the change in conditions. Simon expressed confidence in Her Majesty, stating that he believed in her abilities. However, the thought arose that the Overlord himself, Ya No, might not have wanted Her Majesty to succeed in this exam from the beginning, which might be the reason for his silence on the matter. The action then moved to the fencing ground, where the subsequent events unfolded, leaving a sense of bewilderment and uncertainty in the air as to the great ruler's true motives. Iris watched the guys and kept thinking about how tough they were. Obviously, fighting adults was something she'd rather not do just yet. Once Oz had defeated his opponent, he made the recommendation that he needed to practice his sword skills better. Thoth couldn't believe he was also teaching him. When Andre defeated his opponent, he only said that it was easy and asked how he was going to pass the exam with such abilities. It was good to be young, so energetic and ambitious. The clock showed only 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Iris realized that it was too early to go in. So she decided to wait at the entrance to the magic testing room to be on time. There were already a lot of people standing in the magic testing hall. The examiner announced that the swordsmanship exam was over, and now the magic test would begin. The participants were advised to line up and wait their turn before entering the exam hall. Andre attracted attention with his pathetic appearance. He was in a terrible state, wrapped in bandages and covered in plasters. His clothes were torn and tattered. At the same time, Oz was standing next to him, neat and fresh as ever, providing a contrast to Andre's ragged appearance. The little girl didn't understand why the two looked so different. Iris heard the boys talking nearby. They were saying that it was not without reason that the Prime Minister's son, after realizing that he would lose, immediately surrendered and the cabinet suspended the fight. Not like that mad kid, the general's son. His character is tough, but they still can't compare with his skill. Majesty, carefully analyzing what was happening, concluded that this approach suited their style and methods. The next phase of the trials began, and all 3 were called to the test. The little girl couldn't help but notice how quickly Oz caught up with her, which caused her some surprise. In response, she put her hand on the door, preparing for the next phase of the test, which she thought was quite close. Suddenly, Oz wished Her Majesty good luck, which struck the little one unexpectedly and pleasantly. She thanked him heartily for those words, showing her appreciation and respect for him. Furious that Oz, this kid, had the audacity to be the first to speak to Her Majesty, Andre could hardly contain his emotions. His eyes were aflame with indignation, and his heart was beating with such force that it seemed it might jump out of his chest at any moment. When Iris opened the doors, an empty room stood before her, devoid of any sign of life or movement. This made her uneasy and displeased, as she had expected to see something else entirely. Perhaps her friends or some signs of activity. Then suddenly the order to begin the test rang out, announcing the entire room. At that moment the air was filled with tension, and the atmosphere became unusually tense, as if someone's unquenchable expectations and hopes were in the air. The little girl, suddenly feeling the fall, began to slowly sink down, realizing that she was at altitude. Vaguely aware of what was happening and feeling disoriented, she could not understand how she was in this situation and where exactly she was, because she had just been in another room. She realized that she was about to crash, so she began to ask Lillian, the goddess of winds, to take pity on her. But that's just why Iris can't muster her magical powers, and the thought flashed through her mind that she's going to die again, like a memory from a past life. She was falling too. The police officer told them to report to the commander that student fell to save a small child. At the moment she was saving the child, she was also hoping that someone would save her. The shadow that appeared said that it was better that one had not been born, and Gu Yun Yun kept asking for help, to be rescued worthless and unwanted. At that moment, a hand reached out and grabbed the girl, It was Mei Li who took the little girl's hand and informed her that she needed to grow up. This was no longer the past world. The maid carefully covered the infant with a warm blanket, realizing that concern for her comfort carried with it concern for her own health as well. Without proper shelter, she could easily catch a cold, which would endanger not only her but the baby as well. May would tell the baby a tale about a mama deer and her little fawn, immersing herself in a world of fantasy and magic. This story of adventures in a fairyland where they lived happily ever after awakened May's childhood dreams and hopes. Some people gathered around May, who lovingly watched her and supported every step of her growing up. Their hopes and well-wishes were like a light in a dark forest, filling her heart with warmth and inspiring her to new achievements. Suddenly, Iris gathered all her will into a fist and announced with confidence in her voice that she had no intention of giving up. She realized that she was facing a serious challenge, but she was determined to overcome all obstacles and achieve her goal. She tried again to ask the goddess of winds Lillian for help, to take pity on the believer who dreamed of freedom. She gave her wings so that she could soar. And so she did. In this world, she is no longer an unwanted person. She landed and saw that the general's son was already there. The little girl didn't understand what he was doing there. Iris greeted him, but Andre only waved a twig a little with words for that magical creature that could change appearance, quickly telling her where Her Majesty was at that moment. Her father made her guard Her Majesty during the test and threatened to take away his candy money to get his act together. Iris replied that it was her. She didn't yet know whether to praise him for his attentiveness or scold him for his stupidity. Andre warmly grasped Iris's hand and tried to reassure her that her appearance had no bearing on their ability to handle the magical test. In his words, he sounded anxious for the safety and successful completion of the test, perhaps spurred on by suspicions of possible magical intrigue. Despite her doubts and worries, Iris decided to express her doubts by asking Andre how they would be better off taking the test, together or separately. Her participation in the test was an integral part of their overall strategy, and she sought to understand how they could succeed. In response to the little girl's questions, Andre assured her that Oz's presence was of little importance, as he did not, in his opinion, possess any significant magical abilities. In his words, one could detect a slight disdain and disappointment at his friend's participation in this magical ordeal. The sudden rejoinder revealed Andre's hidden jealousy and resentment. He expressed his dislike for guys who, in his opinion, easily win the favor of girls, which could indicate personal complexes or negative views of his own masculinity. Oz watched all of this and thought that since his father had told him to outdo Her Majesty on points, then he had better go it alone. After a while, as they walked deeper into the forest, Andre asked about the broken test, since there was no assignment, how he, a young master, could prove himself. Iris replied that it was true that the royal test was considered so difficult, but that little crystal kept haunting her. She didn't understand what it was. Andre informed that it must be a tracking crystal. He had seen one in his older brother's study. He realized what he had to do, for he had an idea. He abruptly grabbed that crystal and started screaming, addressing his father as he knows he is watching it. He ordered him to go to the examiner and make him tell his assignment. Otherwise, he will not take the exam. The general only laughed. He would deal with him when his son returned. Cal saw the chipmunk scout in the crystal. Except for those eyes, it looked like someone was controlling him. Someone's probably trying to screw up the test. Cal, determined to get out of the situation, went to his teacher to announce his decision. In response, the high priest asked him to stay where he was, making sure that his student was not going to run away from the test. Cal obediently accepted this demand and remained in place. Andre, clutching the crystal, turned to his companion and asked if he had heard his previous words, threatening to repeat them again. Iris, seeing his agitation, gently asked him not to shout, trying to remain calm in an unforeseen situation. Suddenly, a monster appeared behind them, causing excitement and fear. The two turned around to look at the new arrival and saw the monster standing behind them. The two turned around and saw that monster. Oz was there. Oz saw Andre and Iris and got a little dazed. The little girl shouted for him to be a curate because there were scout chipmunks behind them. Oz asked them to calm down, for he knew this would happen. The little girl instantly reacted to the cry for help and rushed over to Andre, ready to give him support. Saying that Oz was in danger and that they had an obligation to help him, she expressed her willingness to do whatever she could to help her friend. Andre, however, had a different attitude and quickly dispelled the illusion of his willingness to help. He clearly made it clear that he was not going to interfere in the affairs of this womanizer, which caused perplexity and disappointment to Baby. She had not expected such a refusal and tried to understand what could have been the reason for such behavior. Iris, wasting no time in debate, decided to act on her own and ran ahead. The money for sweets that they had planned to spend together eluded Andre, who remained aloof, burdened with irritation and resentment. The internal conflict and irritation peaked when Andre began to reminisce about the smelly daddy who he felt was the source of all the trouble. He felt hurt that all this tension and conflict was over some candy money, and he felt irritated and frustrated with the situation. One moment, and they arrived at their destination. The little girl noticed that those chipmunks were starting to piss her off. Andre promised that he would destroy them in a heartbeat. He decided to use his flaming sword. Iris asked him to stop, because they are very strange chipmunks. The more you kill them, the more they get. Even though he doesn't want to mess with that kid Oz, but losing to him would be worse than death. As a child, Andre heard the maid say that young Master Oz is very smart, and even the general who dislikes the Prime Minister often praises him. Young Master Oz is so cute, much cuter than the little noisy master who lives in their house. As soon as they met that, Andre was a bit hesitant and embarrassed. He wanted to walk over and say hello to Her Majesty first, but as soon as the boy gathered courage and only wanted to address the little girl, Oz beat him to it. Oz again, Andre thought. He didn't understand why they all liked this pretzel, who only knew how to powder his face. Under the influence of determination, the guy was determined to demonstrate to the others that Oz was a total loser. With each blow, his confidence only increased. The moment he chopped down one of the chipmunks, it instantly split, much to the guy's displeasure. Oz watched from the sidelines, considering the guy a bit out of his mind. His reaction to the events reflected mixed feelings ranging from interest to bewilderment and concern. Iris, who was closely watching what was happening, came to the conclusion that if Andre continued to act this way, the number of opponents would only increase. She recalled the words that the test had begun. Oz was determined. He realized that the only way to prevent Andre's demise was to intervene. The little girl, finding herself in a desperate situation, decided to resort to extreme measures and use her magical abilities. The fire caused by the magic was directed towards Andre, and the little girl with a fierce scream called him to a halt, begging him to save his life. This unexpected turn of events greatly frightened Andre. Even the chipmunks in the area were dumbfounded by what was happening, their reactions showing that even they realized the seriousness of the situation after such an unexpected display of magic. Oz became scared as well. Iris asked about whether he was deaf, as everyone was feeding to stop him. She recommended that he pull his ears out of his ass. Oz reported that chipmunks never attack humans first. He was trying to find a reason why they were suddenly so ferocious, and Andre had wreaked such havoc there. Andre couldn't contain his anger and pounced with questions about what he had said and who was causing the chaos there. The little girl walked confidently over to the chipmunks and reached out to pet them. He liked it so much when the little ones stroked him like that. When they aren't being attacked, they are so cute. Chipmunk took the little one by the finger and started pulling her to the side. It was announced to them that the first task of the magic test was about to begin. The little girl couldn't believe that right there. She determinedly headed after the chipmunks, and with words of encouragement she quickly went to go and see. Andre didn't realize what the other task was. The kids were on their way to their first assignment, but lo and behold, they were being followed. The head of that bantha said that it was all because that general's bunny had caused chaos there. Otherwise, he would have controlled those hamsters, and there would have been no problems with the queen. They'll think of something else. Cal showed up for that mission in the guise of a kitty cat. He hadn't seen her in a few years. The godchild had grown up to be a pretty good girl. The purified heart was very useful to him too. It was time to get it back, but just what kind of people? Whispering Forest. They reached their destination. Andre saw a settlement with chipmunks. He didn't realize it was a magical quest. Iris said that the shadow mouse's nest is very wide and it guards the entrance to the forest. It looks like they have to go through this nest. The chipmunks were surprised that the little girl understood that. Andre embraced that. Then what are they waiting for? It's time to fight. The shadow mouse will be harder to deal with than the hamsters, so they need to calm down a bit. Shadow mice are the fastest, small, magical creatures, and they can also electrocute, group together, and have a leader. They are very hard to deal with. They need to think hard to find a way to do it. Suddenly something started to happen. Everyone was in a sprawl and running away in a scattering. The three stood and watched. The scouts appeared. Iris turned around and realized that there were scouts among the shadow mice. They had been discovered. Andre wondered what made scouts different from normal scouts. Oz, who was concentrating on magic, explained that they patrol the area and report anything they notice. The shadow mice ran out without interruption. Andre quickly conveyed to his companions that he would delay the pursuers to give them time to escape to safety, outside the danger zone. Realizing that their mission was important not only to themselves, but also to the well-being of Her Majesty and their own skirt chaser, they did not hesitate and began preparations for retreat. Mouse, realizing the danger, began thrashing around, trying to break through the young master's defenses. However, his lightning-fast reactions and agility helped him repel the attacks without giving the enemy the slightest chance to penetrate. He felt confused at how persistent and resourceful the pursuers were. They seemed to be clingy, flashing here and there, dodging his blows and avoiding being hit. He fought each opponent, waging a lightning-fast battle at the edge of possibility. Finally, with his skill and determination, he was able to grab one of his pursuers and pin him to the ground. The shadow mouse, once in his strong hands, was not going to give up without a fight, and he could feel its resistance with all his might. Oz informed him to be careful, for he was being attacked from behind. The mouse paralyzed him a little. The boy couldn't move. The little girl came to the rescue and used magic to ward off Andre's attack. He turned around to see where the help came from and noticed Her Majesty. Iris quickly realized that trying to run away from the shadow mice was futile, so they decided to confront them in battle. A spark of magic ignited in her mind field as she began to summon the help of the goddess of nature, Stephanie. She prayed for the power to control plants to resist the attack of the shadow creatures. Under the influence of this magic, the little girl was able to instantly create her own defense trap, using the vegetation around her to bind and slow the shadow mice's advance. The boys, seeing her determination and skill in magic, were inspired to prepare for battle, ready to stand in defense with her. As Iris was reciting for magic, those masked men peeked out from the bushes. The head decided it was the perfect opportunity and threw a poison dart at her. Her Majesty felt that someone was behind her. She wanted to turn around decisively. But lo and behold, she saw Oz being attacked by a shadow mouse. She asked him to be more careful. It was too late to think about the rear. For now, she couldn't be distracted. Overseeing it all was Cal in the guise of a kitty cat. He just waved his paw and knocked that dart away. After that, the little girl didn't feel threatened anymore. She didn't know if she was imagining it. But as soon as she turned in their direction to make sure, those men hid behind the bushes. They had fallen through. The head shook with fear. He didn't realize if there was anyone else out there, he needed to tell his boss soon. Suddenly, the little girl heard a noise in the bushes. She asked who was there and asked to be shown. Cal came down to the ground in the guise of a cat with an unusual grace that was admired by others. His keen hearing and penetrating eyesight invariably served as faithful helpers in the most difficult situations. Baby, seeing the black cat, experienced genuine surprise. But her attention was quickly drawn to something else. In the bushes behind the cat, she noticed the silhouette of a shadow mouse. This discovery made her realize that the kitty was in danger. Glittering sparks of magic enveloped baby girl as she drew the kitty to her, using all her powers to save him from danger. Her heart beat harder from the exertion, but she knew she couldn't let any harm come to this defenseless creature. Iris squeezed him so tightly and explained that it was very dangerous out there for now, so she should stay with her for now. He didn't have a good feeling about this. The commander is cold-blooded and consistent. Andre didn't understand how they had managed to dodge. The Mouse King started making a fuss. Oz was confused. Iris cradled the kitty more and more tightly. Now the worst had happened. Well, now they would have to face them. But there was no need to spread out again, but to be as a single well-trained magic army. Iris was protected from that light ball of energy that was heading towards the heroes. She kept guarding the kitty as she did so. Cal couldn't believe that she was protecting him. He saw that this barrier Iris had made was so weak, like a piece of paper. He decided he'd better make one himself. Cal waved his paw again. A sudden sharp sound cut through the silence, breaking the thin thread of the spell that held the group in tense anticipation. The little girl sitting next to her looked up in consternation, not realizing what could have caused such a sudden noise. In her small world, full of mystery and mystery, every unexpected sound was a sign of something unusual and potentially dangerous. The chipmunks, sensing something threatening in this sudden sound, began to scatter in panic, scattering through the forest like leaves in the wind. Andre, however, did not let them escape his control, shouting orders and demanding that they stop and not continue their flight. His power over the chipmunks was undeniable, and he was determined to see it through to the end, despite the outside circumstances. While the chipmunks were scurrying around, Baby, still stunned by what had happened, asked Andre about the origin of the strange sound that had caused them to flee. He asked her not to think about small things. It was better to get out of there quickly. Andre saw Oz take Her Majesty's hand and lead the way. He asked him, the womanizer, where he was going with Her Majesty. Andre ordered him to quickly hand Her Majesty off and wondered if Oz was listening to him at all. They continued to run. The little girl didn't understand what they were suffering about. The boys stopped abruptly. Andre asked if he was dreaming. They were out of breath. Suddenly, the voice of the examiner was heard, informing them that this was their first task: destroy the three-headed demonic snake. Andre almost vomited at the words about the three-headed snake. Iris and Oz asked him to be quiet. Oz wondered if they thought it was a bit much, if this assignment was only meant to test their magical abilities. The little girl thought she was only seen in books. The magical creature known as the snake demon is a fearsome foe, even for the most experienced of evil hunters. Its terrible power and ruthlessness penetrate to the very depths of the soul, leaving behind only a shadow of hope for victory. Meeting this creature fills the hearts of even the bravest heroes with terror and anxiety. For General Suez, once considered the greatest warrior in the Empire, crushing the demon snake was a true test. For 3 long days he fought it, waging an endless battle of life and death. His triumph was a costly victory from which only a thread of the finest magic separated him. Cal, upon hearing of the assignment, thought it presented a unique challenge, but doubted his ability to handle it. He realized that there were insurmountable obstacles to victory, and he had to be extremely careful not to draw the attention of an unwelcome enemy to the little empress. The cat, Iris's faithful companion, accepted his part in this dangerous enterprise. He served her like a trustworthy guardian, keeping an attentive eye at her side. With the crystal holding a portion of her power, Iris was especially vulnerable, and Kotick was determined not to leave her side even for a moment. Iris proposed a plan to the boys whereby they could avoid a confrontation in reality and instead kill her directly in her sleep. This plan seemed safer and more effective to them, as it involved minimal risk for all involved. After all, winning in a dream seemed less dangerous than risking your life in a physical confrontation. The boys agreed with the idea and continued on their way, trying to be extremely careful not to attract unnecessary attention. Every step was an act of extreme caution, for the outcome of their plan depended on it. But even the most careful efforts could be disrupted by unforeseen circumstances. Even with all precautions, however, an unforeseen incident could not be avoided. The sudden crunch of a twig snapping beneath their feet gave away their presence. The boys froze in place, with the realization that their plan was now in jeopardy. The chances of success had sharply decreased, and they were faced with the task of finding a solution in an extreme situation. Now, they were in big trouble.